Hello, everyone. We are going to talk about Chapter 12, which is Managing Conflict. We are going to cover what is conflict styles, conflict in relational systems, and then conflict management in practice. Here are the learning objectives that we will cover. We're going to describe the nature of conflict and its attributes. We will explain the 5 styles of handling conflict and how they are communicated. We will recognize various communication patterns and relational conflicts. We'll explain how the conflict management process can ideally resolve interpersonal conflicts. So let's start. I am going to start with a story. Once upon a time, there was a world without conflicts. The leaders of each nation recognized the need for cooperation, and they met regularly to solve any potential problems. They never disagreed on matters that needed attention or on ways to handle these matters. And so there was never any international issues and there was never any war. Within each nation, things ran smooth. The citizens always agreed on who their leaders should be, and all of the elections were unanimous. There was no social friction among various groups. Age, race, and educational differences did not exist because each group respected others and got along in harmony. Human relationships were always perfect. Strangers were always kind and friendly to each other. Neighbors were considerate of each other's needs. Friendships were always mutual, and no disagreements ever spoiled people's enjoyment of one another. Once people fell in love, and everyone did, they stayed happy. Partners liked everything about each other and were able to fully satisfy each other's needs. Children and parents agreed on every aspect of family life and never were critical or hostile towards each other. Every day was better than the one before. And of course, everybody lived happily ever after. Well, obviously, this is not our reality because conflict exists in all of our daily life. And you know, can you imagine what world would be like if it was like this fairy tale that I just mentioned, where we got along in everything and there was no disagreements? So, regardless of what we may wish for or dream about, or, maybe you want it to be a conflict-free world, that's, not the reality. And even people who have the best of intentions and people who are good communicators, they are going to end up in situations where their needs don't match the needs of other people. And this could be because of many different things. It can be money, it can be time, it can be power, it can be humor, it can be, taste, and all of the different things that can come up. So at some point, there's going to be some sort of issue that you deal with. And so how do we deal with this and, conflicts that arise? So first, what is conflict and how do you define it? So how they define conflict is a express struggle between at least two interdependent parties who perceive incompatible goals, scarce resources, and interference from the other party in achieving their goals. So, this definition of conflict requires that all the people involved know that some disagreement exists. So you may be upset for months because a neighbor's loud music keeps you awake at night, but no conflict exists until the neighbor knows and learns that there isn't a problem. So an expressed struggle doesn't have to be verbal. A dirty look, the silent treatment, avoiding the other person are all ways that you may express that you're upset with someone. But these people must know that the problem exists before it does fit the definition that they are using for conflict. And in all conflicts, have perceived incompatible goals. So, for instance, in the example we use, consider a neighbor who has loud music that's keeping you awake at night. It appears that someone has to lose. Either the neighbor loses the enjoyment of hearing the music at full volume, or you're gonna be left awake unhappy. So the goals in the situation are not compatible. They are incompatible. And, so solutions do not exist that allow you both to get what you want. So there's going to be expressed struggles that, convey the idea that conflict exists and that people know it exists. And, interdependence captures the notion that people in a conflict are connected and in some way. And then perception of scarce resources occurs when people believe there is not enough of something to go around. And so that could be affection, money, space, and time. So then when you look at conflict styles, so how do you deal with this when there is a conflict that is happening? How do you handle it? So most people have default styles of handling conflicts, and they use these when their needs appear incompatible with what they want. And so, what style do you typically use so when a situation occurs? So, one situation might be Cam and Lee have been roommates for several years. Cam is a soccer fan and loves watching games with his friends at every opportunity. Their apartment has a big screen TV that is owned by Cam in the living room, and it has become a regular gathering spot for viewing. Lee doesn't mind watching an occasional game, but he gets annoyed by what seems like endless TV and endless house guests. Cam thinks he should be able to watch his TV whenever he wants with whomever he wants. So here are, the different ways that he could handle it with each of the conflict styles that we're discussing. So the first one is avoidance. Cam and Lee don't discuss the issue again. The prospect of fighting is too unpleasant. So Cam has tried to cut back on watching games with his friends, but he feels cheated and upset. Lee keeps quiet, but when game time rolls around, his feelings of being upset are still quite obvious. So this is a lose-lose situation because they both are still upset about the situation and just avoiding it because it hasn't gone away. Because the people are just ignoring or staying away from the conflict in not dealing with it. Another way that they could handle it is Lee gives in and says, go ahead and watch all the soccer that you want because it's your TV. I'll go in the bedroom and listen to music. And then Cam agrees. Alternatively, Cam could accommodate by agreeing not to watch soccer at home. So that is the accommodation where it is a lose-win situation. So in accommodation, this occurs when we entirely give in to others rather than asserting our own point of view. And then you have competition. So Cam tries to persuade Lee that watching more soccer will lead to a better understanding of the game, and that Lee will want to watch it as a result and be interested in it. Lee tries to convince Cam that spending so much time watching TV isn't healthy. Both try to get the other person to give up and give in. So, you know, this approach to conflict is a high concern for self, and it's a very low concern for other people. So you're really just concerned for what you want, and you're not really concerned about what the other people want. You're just trying to get whatever is important to you. There are, two different things that can occur in this. When you're passive aggressive, this can occur when a communicator expresses dissatisfaction in a disguised manner and it's not very direct. When someone's direct and directly aggressive, this occurs when a communicator attacks the position and the dignity of the person. And so this can be a pretty aggressive approach and results in kind of like a win-lose situation. And then we have compromising. So in this example that we're using, the roommates agree to split the difference. Cam gets to watch any and every game at home as long as his friends don't come over. Cam gets soccer, Lee gets some peace and quiet. Of course, Cam still misses his friends, and Lee still has to endure hours of Cam's TV viewing. So here there is compromise being made in the fact that, they're coming to some sort of mutual agreement. This gives both people at least some of what they want, but both people have to sacrifice part of what, of their original goals of what they originally were asking for. This can result in a win-win situation. Another alternative could be Cam and Lee brainstorm and discover other alternatives in the collaboration. For example, they decide that fans could watch some games together at a sports bar. They also realized that if each of Cam's friends could pitch in a specific sum of money, one of the friends could buy a large TV where they could watch some games and avoid the sports bars. And Lee also suggests that he and Cam could watch some non-sports TV shows together. So these are other alternatives that they're trying to come up with and brainstorm together. So this involves a high degree of concern for both yourself and other people. The goal is to find a solution that satisfies the needs of everybody involved. And this is a win-win approach as well. So something that I'm sure a lot of you know about that they kind of talk about too is ghosting in the dark side of communication. So this is when somebody doesn't respond back to you through texting or emailing or phone calling, or they block you on social media. Maybe it's somebody that you were close to, or maybe it's someone that you were initially talking to, or maybe it was a relationship that you had, and then they just completely cut off all contact. And, why do you think people do that? And, how does that make you feel? And do you ever think that that's acceptable? I think that unfortunately, this is definitely a more common thing today with social media, with dating apps, with digital technology. People, I think it's okay to do this. And, you know, even people who have been in relationships with people and they just completely ghost them and stop responding to them. And this is, an act of passive aggression or just complete avoidance because you're not dealing with any of the issues or not dealing with your feelings. And that can, hurt somebody really bad and also leave a lot of unresolved issues because you're not addressing the conflict at all. And it's just hanging out there. A conflict style isn't necessarily a personality trait that carries across all situations. The style to use depends upon several factors. It's going to depend on the situation, the other person. It's going to decide, depend on your goals. So it is going to vary, depending on a lot of things. So conflict styles in your relational systems is kind of what we're starting to look at now. And you kind of have conflict happens within relational systems and is determined by how the people involved are interacting. You have complementary and symmetrical conflict. So, even though the side you choose in a conflict is important, your approach isn't the only factor that will, determine how the situation unfolds. In reality, conflict happens within the relational system that we're talking about. In complementary conflict, the partners use different but mutually reinforcing behaviors. So some complementary conflicts are destructive, whereas others are constructive. In symmetrical conflict, both people use the same tactics, and the same conflict can unfold in very different ways depending on whether the partners communicate in symmetrical or complementary ways. So a complementary fight or flight approach is common in many unhappy marriages. So one partner addresses the conflict directly, whereas the other withdraws. So this pattern can lead to a cycle of hostility and isolation because each partner, punctuates the conflict directly and blames the other person, which can make matters worse. I withdraw because you're so critical, and one partner, might say, I am criticizing because you withdraw, and couples are who use demand withdrawal patterns are then less satisfied with their conflict discussions, and that continues to cause issues. So this was some stuff that we talked about a little bit in some of the previous chapters. An escalatory spiral occurs when partners treat each other with matching hostility, so that one threat or insult kind of starts to lead to another one. And so that can kind of start to cause a problem if both of them are withdrawing from each other instead of facing their problems. And then that can cause a de-escalatory spiral. And in that, this results if the participants withdraw from one another instead of, really facing their issues. And then you have the serial arguments, which are the repetitive conflicts about the same issue that you can't get past. Common causes and issues are problematic behaviors, personality characteristics, communication styles, and practices. And these just basically keep reoccurring and get brought up over and over and over. So, in a perfect world, we would work through our relational conflict and move on. But in reality, this is just not the case. So, some of the topics could be household chores. Maybe you keep asking someone to help you do dishes or to cook, and that doesn't happen, and it keeps falling on one person. Or maybe it is something related to budgeting or money, and that keeps coming up over and over. You keep having the same disagreement. Or cleanliness. One person is more clean than the other person. Laundry, those types of things. So those are just ongoing issues and friction that are occurring. Or personality characteristics. If one person is more of an introvert versus an extrovert, if one person needs more social interaction, that's going to keep being an issue if the other person wants to stay at home because the other person's going to feel upset if they want to go out and do things and their partner doesn't want to do things with them. And so, these things will just keep happening. So this is always an interesting topic right here, I think, in this chapter, and it is called Toxic Conflict, the Four Horsemen. So some conflict approaches are so destructive that they're almost guaranteed to wreak havoc on a relationship, and these toxic forms of communication have been called the four horsemen of the apocalypse, which is pretty extreme. But basically, the researcher has done decades of data from newlywed couples, and this is based on their communication patterns. And he observed their interactions, and he has been able to predict with a pretty high accuracy rate if they are going to end up in getting a divorce based on these four destructive signs. So the first sign that can be a predictor if people are more likely to get a divorce is criticism. So these are attacks on a person's character. So there is a significant difference between complaints, where you use I language, I wish you had been on time, we're going to be late to a movie, and critical, you know, attacks like you're so thoughtless, you never think of anyone but yourself. And the next is defensiveness. And so defensiveness is a reaction that aims to protect yourself by denying responsibility. You're crazy, I never do that, and counterattacking. You're worse about that than I am. So although some self-protection is understandable, problems arise when a person refuses to listen or even acknowledge other people's concerns. And so that will keep causing problems. And then contempt. So contempt comment belittles and demeans. It can take the form of name calling or putting down. Well, you're a jerk, or that was brilliant, or contempt can also be communicated non-verbally through eye rolling or disgust or other dismissive signals. And then stonewalling. Stonewalling occurs when one person is in the relationship withdraws from the interaction. They shut down dialogue, and any chance of resolving the problem is not happening in a mutually satisfactory way. It sends a message like you don't matter to the other person. So these type of communication behaviors can jeopardize the relationship, and it also takes a physical toll. And that's because it can increase your stress levels and higher your blood pressure and, just cause a whole bunch of other unhealthy emotions. Toxic conflict can be destructive in an interpersonal relationship. So then we start to look at conflict management and win-win problem solving. So, conflict management in practice. So these are kind of, guidelines on how to best approach win-win problem solving and what things that you want to do. So, first you want to define your needs by deciding what you want or need. Share your needs with the other person when the time and place is suitable and you are at your best. Use I language and use ritual sharing. This is preliminary, casual conversations. Listen to the other person's needs. Generate possible solutions through brainstorming. Evaluate the possible solutions and choose the best one once all of the possibilities have been exhausted. and implement the solution and follow up the solution to review and, you know, assess if it's effective or not. And here are the learning objectives that we covered. We described the nature of conflict and its attributes, explain the 5 stages, 5 styles of handling conflict and how they are communicated. We recognize various communication patterns and relational conflicts. And then we explained how the conflict management process can ideally resolve interpersonal conflicts.